Well, good afternoon to you, Scott Baker. Happy
Mikey
Monday.
Ames, indeed, it is a Monday, and it's a holiday week, but we're still at it here. And
We're
I
at
know a
it.
lot of folks will be off for a week. Sometimes organizations will, be off for Christmas to New Year's, and a lot of the kids are off already and everything else. But that's just a good time to reflect, and sometimes reflect on sort of best practices. And today's field note is called "Incorporating Symbols into Your To-Do List." And in a way, this kind of builds on the one yesterday, which was about odd times that trick the brain. So we've got these big philosophical field notes we do, and then sometimes this sort of it seems niche and practical. But I think we proved yesterday on the odd times that sometimes niche and practical can actually be pretty philosophical and profound. So let's see what happens as we talk about symbols for your to-do list.
Right. So symbols in my to-do list always showed up in the way that bullet journaling kind of is a basic thing. There's lots of
and
symbols.
this is I have never done the bullet journal thing, but I knew that you had, and so I thought, well, this might be like right down your alley to enlighten not only me but others. And you do kind of like, I don't know, modified version of that now, like not quite as
right. It's really just an excuse for me to doodle more often than not.
yeah. Okay,
So
that's good.
But
Right.
so if you're actually interested, this is the basics of bullet journaling. Like if you're going to pick up any kind of basic bullet journaling, it's just mark the tasks as a period. Once the task is completed, it's an X, right? And then with that thing in the middle, if the task is being migrated to a different day or a different week, then you're going to have it basically written down in two places. So the first place that it was written down, you need a notation for yourself that the task was migrated. It was moved to the next day. And you just need that record. And so that arrow to the right still allows you to eventually complete the task completed part there with the X, right? So that will turn into that once it's there. A task that's been scheduled, right, is something that is actually moved into a different kind of a list for you. But eventually you're going to get that task completed and it's going to be X'd out. So it's going to be moved around in a few different places in the way that it actually works for you. And so you just need to be able to have your symbols flexible enough that when you're looking at when you first wrote it down a week ago, you're not scratching things out and coming up with a brand new symbol.
You mean task irrelevant?
Yeah, task irrelevant is not scratched out in such a way that you're like, I don't know what to do with it anymore. You're kind of right.
Yeah.
And then you're signaling to your brain like that this is a note, right? And so that symbol to the brain is like, I should not read this as a task. I should read this as just a notation of something. And then an event, which actually has a time related to it, is in a circle. All that seems very simple. But once you actually start incorporating it into your journal, the quick grab of, oh, I can see that it's not a to-do, it's an event, right? And once you start doing this and you're like, well, can't you just use different color-coded things to be able to do that? The symbols take on a life of their own of like how you should read it. It's kind of fascinating that your brain actually becomes acclimated to seeing what is a task, what is a moved task, what's something that is now on my schedule and what is not.
Now, for everyone who's listening later and not watching video live right now on Substack or other social platforms, you're already like, oh, these people are just insane. But there is a rhythm to this particular set. And I think the one thing that's nice about the field note is it's saying it's not like endorsing or prohibiting bullet journaling. It's very agnostic to what your symbols might look like or be. And also for those of you not listening, we're kind of taking a live shot from a site that has a layout here that shows this, but it's also giving us in real time a lot of fun internet ads that are kind of popping. And so I'm like, oh, well, where do I schedule my Geico appointment here to get my new insurance? But now, now we've gone, just for everybody listening, we went from the basic, here's a task, and then there's a little, this looks like hieroglyphics, and both for the people that are watching and for listening.
Yeah.
And I do wonder, in the same way that we go back and we look at the the Siobhan caves and the handprints on the wall from 30,000 years ago, and we spend a lot of time just trying to figure out what were in these Mayan civilizations and what was happening in the Egyptian cultures, and they're going to look back and they're like, wow, there was some very bizarre thing here.
Right.
What is the thing that looks like the box with the X in the middle and a little flower on top? Oh, that's a birthday. Wow. Okay. So, now,
but it goes back even before
this.
that, right? Even before we were writing on walls, smoke signals were a thing where we're trying to communicate in bite-sized chunks to each other by just like how big the billow of smoke that we're sending up in the air is.
No doubt, right? And actually, when we talk about symbols, sometimes we are very visual, and I have questions and concerns, because I also find myself, even though I'm very pro symbolism. In fact, I have a friend who has an entire site called The Symbolic World, but we now have lots of meme, sort of symbols, and I get a certain number. I get too many Substacks, but a couple of them, they just use symbols on the Substacks or on newsletters, and I just start tuning those out, because you're throwing all of these images at me that really don't mean anything. So you can make stuff just be meaningless by overuse. But you do want a base minimum, and I think that's the issue here, which is what is useful in terms of how you organize your time. Because we talked about yesterday about odd times. Your time, your attention is all that you have. And the way that we attend to the world is the way that the world lays out that. Our worldviews do create those worlds. And so the way in which you organize the things that you're going to try to accomplish in a day is a profound sort of task. And so if there is a way to add a symbol that makes that a more a rhythmic dance, if there's a way that's more focused around people, if there's a way that actually keeps you on an even keel, well, then great. So my question is, you were going diligently into the bullet journal world, and then you backed off a little bit. So where do you end up landing in terms of what stuck over time?
So the reason that I backed off is probably because I felt a little bit constrained by what a lot of bullet journals think that the rules that should be followed. And even though I understood, I don't need to follow those rules, I still felt a little bit constrained by all of that. And I was like, what's the difference?
Because it's a cult?
What's the difference between my maintaining just a journal that has some of those symbols that kind of work for me versus me like being able to call myself officially a bullet journaler, right? Because I'm using all the code, the insiderish code in kind of a way. And some of it was like the appeal of wanting to be able to, like, in the same way that we talk about admired leadership, I wanted to be like the kind of people that I saw that I really thought their journaling habits were great. The best ones that I saw were bullet journalers. So I'm like, well, let me actually do the things of the people that I respect the most. And then maybe I can, and it just felt a little bit much, only because I didn't want the work of journaling becoming
to be a
job,
right.
The work of my day, right? I didn't want to distract with the idea, like people in offices who have a culture around meetings, like meetings for everything. That's the distracting
That's
part.
The work, right?
The meeting becomes the work of the organization, and I didn't want journaling to be my work, so I gave myself a break from having to feel as if I am in fact a bullet journaler, even though I feel like,
right.
I only backed off a little bit, only from the idea of like not putting that label pressure on myself.
Well, and look, I think hopefully there's an inspiration both in what you've done, and Cal Newport has talked about how he began as kind of a David Allen getting things done devotee, and then finally also felt the same thing, like it was just too much. Now, David Allen would defend that and say, no, you don't have to make it this. It's actually about offloading process. I'm not an expert in getting things done, or David Allen, by the way, so I'm not here nor there on it. I've read his book and others, and I know people that love those things. But you can, and a certain kind of person, not always, but often men, for some reason, and I think there's an element to that where it's like there are people that want to have, it's when like Google was designing their original interface, It was so different because it was just clear. It was like white with a box. And they're like, well, very few people are like pilots in the cockpit where they want to see 50 different switches and latches and they want to be able to do this. And here's the blog roll and here's all of this other stuff. Most people don't want that. And they found that like women in particular were like really drawn to the simplicity of the Google interface. Again, I'm not making any comments on the way that brains work of any entity on the planet. But when you look at that and you say, well, what is the objective of where I'm going? Well, that's why I'm drawn to people a little bit like Newport, but he's got his own journal that he sells that you can go and it has a process of write this way and do this and move these blocks and chunks. And Oliver Burkeman has studied all of this stuff. And in his book, Meditations for Mortals, he's like, maybe you do it totally the other way. Maybe you don't do a list of anything. Maybe you just say, and he actually has said that many people find this satisfying. I've tried it on a number of days, which is do a thing, write down the thing, and then cross it out. And then you go to the next thing that you say, well, what do I need to do next? Let me do that. Write down the name of the thing you did, cross that one out or check it off. And then over the course of the day, you'll do 8 or 10 things and you look and you go like, that was a pretty good day. Right?
Yeah,
You didn't start with a list that was weighing you down. You actually just started building something that felt great.
Yeah. Now there's a lack of priority. There seems like a lack.
There could be, right? There could be.
That you could eventually get into that. So,
or you might miss something.
Yeah, right. But if you are struggling with like, how do I get started? That's probably a good way to get yourself started. Just get in the practice of writing things down, even if you're writing them afterwards, right? Mm-hmm. And then you can slowly get into the idea of like planning them out beforehand, which a lot of people, like they're at this stage where they don't have to-do lists at all. Like they've made their entire career from the idea of like just operating out of the most urgent thing that is in their inbox, right? And, and I know people who literally create their inbox in their email as their to-do list. And so they've got 2 or 3 different separations up top, and they're using some of the symbols that Outlook or Google give them to be able to just show what is a high priority. And that is the whole thing that becomes there. And for them, they're motivated by being able to report back to somebody else that it's been completed, right? And so, but in a lot of ways, there's the tyranny of the urgent. Like, I don't know how you escape, if you do that kind of thing, how do you escape from the idea that the person who is the biggest nagger of your email inbox is the one who gets your attention?
Yeah. So, well, look, the people forget, but back in the day, and we had a reference. It's a video I was working on for a module that'll be in our subscriber platform soon. And somebody mentioned the old quote, and they weren't sure who said it, but it actually was Stephen Covey who said the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And I was like, was it really Covey? Like, I met Covey back in the day, and I read all that. It was like, indeed, like when you look at the quote investigators of the world, they're like, yeah, it actually was Covey that said that. But Covey wrote a book shortly after 7 Habits, co-wrote it with a couple, a husband and wife team, around the idea of time. And I think it was in that book where he built out the idea that when you have a quadrant of a 2x2 quadrant and you have that sort of important and urgent box, that is not the place that you want to live. That where you want to live is in the things that are important but not urgent, and that if you actually prioritize working with those folks or working with those tasks and ideas and endeavors, then your urgent box gets smaller, right? Because you're actually being more thoughtful and deliberate about the things that matter. And that actually maybe goes to Cal Newport's idea of do fewer things, do them better. And so that you're not just trying to race through the day to get the 30 things done on your list and be like, did I put the right birthday, image next to this thing as a symbol? So I think in the end, that's where you want to live. You want to live to say, have I organized do I have a meta goal for my life? Am I working with my objective and reachable goals that I'm at? Where am I moving? So because we are goal-directed creatures just through and through. And then what's the simplest way? I think that's the thing. What's the simplest thing that you can do? Because you can go back to bullet journals or back to the old Franklin planners that people used to carry around. We've been trying to figure this stuff out for a long time. Now we have all these devices. Mm-hmm. And the more that we have those things, I tend to kind of just go back to my, for me, I just write it out in my reporter style Moleskine notebook from scratch every day.
Right.
Because it's just the way of feeling the day.
And at some point you have to transfer that, because that's your day-to-day piece of paper. There was a time in my life that I needed to cut out using Post-it notes, because then I have these little notes all over the place, no organization for the fact. And I think I just wrote stuff down as a memory aid, right?
Yeah.
But then no real time of the day where I would collect everything that I wrote that day and actually coalesce that into a list of some sort. So the fact that, there might be wisdom on all these little notes that are everywhere, but unless I take time to actually collate them and like reflect on them at the end of the day in some way, and actually decide what I want to do with them in the future, I miss like half the stuff that I wrote down. So the most important thing for me was to like stop writing on Post-it notes. And so I had a Post-it note ban inside my office for some time, just because I would just go to them and start writing on them.
Look, in the end, I think and we can leave it with that. And if anybody's watching and you have a system that's worked for you, even though we're about to click off of this and we won't see a lot in the chat now, you could go back to the original field note and add it in the comments, which would be helpful. That if you are prioritizing, I think, relationships and results and not just to-do lists, you're going to have a better life.
Yes.
And I do like and I use certain things in I mainly use just the little box that you can X through. And I'll sometimes do something maybe a little bit like a bullet journal where something's partially completed.
Right.
And I'll often cross things out. And I have things I do every day. Like I have a certain list of like 23 things I do in the morning, and I'm not a slave to it, but I kind of pretty much do. I don't even have to look it up. I can kind of feel all of those things happening as the morning continues. And I will toss things off or bring them on. But the one I've been experimenting with myself that I mentioned once or twice is from Scott Young's experiment over the last year, where he was going back through his 20 years of looking at productivity and using the idea that these guys, who I couldn't remember their name yesterday, I forgot to look it up, where they're like, what is the highlight of your day? Like, what's the one thing that you'd be like, I'm actually excited to spend 90 minutes as focused time on that thing, and don't look at it as a to-do. Highlight sounds a lot better, right? And so if you were able to describe it that way, then it's something that you should feel an emotional connection to and excitement about. So I kind of had 1.5 main highlights for my day-to-day. They're already done. I spent about 90 minutes on one of them. I spent about a half an hour on the other one. I've got a couple of other key things to get done today. But you know what? Here's the thing. How would I prioritize? Where would it go on my list to say, the most important thing that I'm going to do today is talk with Mikey for 15 minutes about the day's field note? Maybe that is the highlight.
Right.
Maybe that's the thing that matters most in the day on a particular day. And most days I would have even forgotten to put it down, to say, like, you know what? I should actually spend 45 minutes really thinking about the topic of the discussion that we're going to have, which I kind of did today. But maybe that is the most important thing. But for a lot of people, be like, that doesn't even feel like a task.
Yes, right, exactly. So, lots to think about here. And I love the idea of like pulling symbols into your day-to-day routine, especially if you're going to be creating lists for others. Like as a parent, oftentimes you do end up just creating lists for others. And so the easiest way to communicate that oftentimes is through symbols as well.
Very much.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Talk to you tomorrow.
Bye now.